Hi there, I'm Tim Carr, and I'd like to say thank you for having me at the vBrownbag Tech Talks at VMworld. Uh, Very pleased to be here. I am what you would call a longtime listener, first-time caller of the vBrownbag series, and definitely first-time presenter. I'm a technical architect with a VAR in Chicago named Ahead. You can find me on Twitter at Timmy Carr, and you can find my blog, like everybody else that does not have enough posts, at timcar.net. So let's talk a little bit about why I'm here and why I don't have any hair. That's a picture of me before I tried to take on this project of integrating vCAC, Orchestrator, vSphere, and Puppet. And I had a lot of trouble finding what I needed to find online in one spot for getting all of this done. So what I wanted to provide everybody today was kind of a roadmap of how you could get started with integrating all of those components together, because it's kind of convoluted, it's kind of complex, and I had a lot of challenges with it. So first of all, let's try talking about what we're looking to automate, okay? What we'd like to do is we'd like to provision a blueprint out of vCAC. We'd like to provision the Puppet agent into that blueprint provision VM. And then we'd like to do that initial Puppet node check-in, which will eventually get that node registered with Puppet, so we can start doing the things that we would normally do with any sort of Puppet registered VM. So let's get after it, and let's talk about assumptions that I've made in this presentation. First of all, I'm using Linux. I'm using CentOS 6.5. There are, of course, wonderful ways to do things like this with Windows as well, but in my case, I'm using Linux. I'm going to assume that vCAC will manage your IP provisioning, and we'll do that based on network profiles out of vCAC. You can log into vCAC and go to infrastructure, reservations, network profiles to get there. We're going to assume that you've got a working customization template for Linux that will help assign that IP and also get VMware tools installed appropriately on your box. And we're going to assume, lastly, that Orchestrator is going to take care of all the automation tasks for integrating these components. I guess there are other ways to do it, but VMware Orchestrator is obviously the back end that lets vCAC really get what it needs to get done. So, initial steps for getting vCAC and Puppet up and running, getting your ducks in a row. I like using other people's great work. Kendrick Coleman probably has one of the most extensive blogs out there on how to get vCAC up and running. His information is right there. Next, get your Puppet server up and running using the Puppet link right there. Puppet considerations. I've listed here some considerations around what you need to do to get your network configured appropriately for Puppet. Puppet is a master and I guess you could say a client type architecture. So ideally your Puppet master server needs to be able to talk on the same network as all of these little nodes that are going to check in. These are the appropriate ports that you need to have on and available to each of them. All the client machines need to talk to the Puppet master on port 8140 and 61613. It sounds just like a zip code that I lived in. So Puppet Master requires some additional ports, notably 443 if you want to log into that web console and see everything that's going on. And keep in mind that you're allowed to play with a free version of Puppet Enterprise that's freely downloadable on Puppet's website. It'll give you 10 nodes for free, so I'd like to encourage everybody to start playing with this tool. There's also great support for a community version of Puppet out there, and that's also available off of a separate link off of the Puppet website. So let's talk about what it takes to get VCO configured to do all of this. And this is where I had probably the most trouble in my implementation. VCO can be kind of a hairy beast. You need to log into that VCO client, and you need to confirm that VCO is listed as an endpoint in vCAC. So log into vCAC, make sure that you have VCO set up, that VCO server that comes with your implementation, or maybe another one that you have in your environment. You need to then log into VCO and configure it to connect back to vCAC. And you can do that under this Library vCloud Automation Center configuration tab. You'll be able to get down there and actually run this workflow. It'll ask for all your information. You put it in, run the workflow, bingo, you're going. And then finally, configure VCO to connect to vCenter. Obviously, since we need to run a process in the VM after we provision it, we need that orchestrator engine to be able to talk to vCenter so that it can actually execute the run script in the guest workflow on that VM. So that's that integration point that you'd want to run right there. All right, so what does a Puppet agent install look like, right? So we got to install the agent on the client node, step one. At that point, the client node runs a Puppet agent run, and what that node will do is it'll check into your master server. That's all configured in a file, or automatically if you're using Puppet Enterprise, if you download your file from the repo. Ultimately, to get that machine working within Puppet, the Puppet master agent will need to sign the certificate request that comes into it. And then you're just ready to puppetize all the things. I mean, it's that easy to get that machine up and running. So, automating this in VCO gets a little bit complicated and convoluted. You need to install VCO customization, and here's the link in VCO for that. And you need to configure the run the program in a guest workflow. Now, I've shown a curl command here. It's user bin curl, and what that's doing is that's actually downloading a file from a repo that's present on my Puppet master server, and then piping all of that to bash prompt. And what that does is that actually runs that agent installer for you. So realistically, getting this integrated is as simple as running this VCO workflow in that guest VM. That guest hits my Puppet master server, downloads the agent, runs the installer, and magically, after you see that, you'll actually, if you log into your console, you'll see, hey, I have a new certificate request, I have a new machine that wants to join my Puppet managed domain, and you can click either accept or reject. I'd like to point out that I'm using CentOS 6.5. There in Puppet Enterprise are other options for repos. So if you're using Ubuntu or any other sort of Linux distribution, there's an option where you can actually run the Puppet apply command after selecting a certain package to be installed on your Puppet machine to give you those other repos to allow you to do this on any type of Linux machine. Finishing up. So I think ultimately what we've done is we've gotten the Puppet agent installed in the machine and we've checked it in, right? What we need to now do is we need to make that capable of happening from that blueprint, right? And so we need to actually configure the assign a state change workflow to the blueprint. And all that's really doing is that's saying that, hey, after my VM is provisioned, execute the workflow that we just talked about executing, right? And that's available here. At that point, after executing those steps, simple, jump into vCAC, select your CentOS 6.5 blueprint and test. There's a little caveat I want to call out. You're going to have to enter your password for that root user to run the program in the guest as part of this test. After this all works and you see your node check in, you want to copy all of these templates and then back on the back end in VCO, do all of that so that it's not exposed to your users. It's just security. Just make sure you're taking care of that. And like I said, check into the Puppet Enterprise console. Your new node should be there and should be ready to go. So what other things could we do with Puppet, and what else am I looking to do beyond this? I'd like to get rid of the user interaction that's involved in the clone the workflow process, and we talked about that. And then finally, that last step where you're in the Puppet Enterprise console and saying, yes, I want this machine to join my Puppet managed domain. There's a way to open up the API on the Puppet master server so that you could just run a REST command against it and say, hey, this certificate, it's good. That's that next step. And that can be done with the RESTful integration module that's in VCO. So look for these updates to this whole process on my blog. I'm going to release a blog posting series on doing just this so that you guys can follow along with exactly what we're doing here. I'd like to thank you for your time today, everyone. I appreciate it. Thanks.